Please welcome to the stage Gregory Southam, partner at Davies, Ward, Phillips & Weinberg, LLP.
That is
No
very
way.
bright.
Like, I mean, it's probably got $500 million worth of free cover.
I mean, what did we say last night? The premier was saying it's the most successful ad campaign.
No kidding.
Maybe I'll just give everyone a minute just to get settled
They didn't even need to buy any time.
before we get started. And you're dealing with a few tired people up on the stage here. Some of us stayed up through to the end of the game, and we're even more tired with the result. So, all right, well, maybe we'll get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on how the PPP industry and its participants, as well as the DNA of the PPP model, can embrace and influence the next generation of energy projects. What we know for certain is that our country is going to need an increase in the generation and distribution of electricity by approximately 75% by 2050 to meet our needs. So let's get started on how the PPP industry can assist in achieving that goal. So as you heard earlier, my name is Greg Southam, and I'm a partner at Davies. And I'm pleased to be joined by this esteemed panel, who really need no introduction, but I'll do it in any event. We have a really nice mixture of energy industry participants from each of the generation and distribution side. The CIB, who already is involved in a number of ways in the Canadian energy market, and from Aecon, our panel sponsor, who are both investors and builders in the energy space. So without further ado, I'll go from my immediate left. So Amanda Klein is the president and CEO of Alexicon. Steve Nakin is the Executive Vice President and President of Aecon Concessions. James, who you've met already earlier this morning, is the Chief Operating Officer and EVP of Bruce Power. And Aaron Corey is the CEO of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. So let's get started a little bit with an industry perspective. And Amanda and James, I'm going to look to you for this. So for a bit of a background, Alexicon distributes electricity to 200,000 customers in the GTAA East and is owned by municipalities in that region. You heard about Bruce Power earlier this morning, but it generates 30% of Ontario's electricity and is owned by TC Energy, OMERS, the Powers Workers Union, and the Society of United Professionals. Amanda, let's start with you. PPPs mean many things to many people, but they're really about partnerships between the public and private sector to find solutions. And that's solutions whether they're found through risk sharing, through private financing, construction, and operational issues. So you have a full room of PPP industry participants. Can you speak to any problems that you face in your industry and policymakers that could assist, and this group could assist? And are there any barriers to that assistance that we as a group should work together to solve?
Thanks, Greg. It's a big question. So good morning, everyone. Super pleased to be here. So I have kind of a fun role on this panel, to add on to what Angela just spoke about more generally in the infrastructure world. I get to now throw down the gauntlet for your very smart folks to challenge you to be a partner in finding creative solutions to unlock the opportunity to build our local grids so that electricity is there when people need to plug in. And, Premier Ford talked about how we are an energy superpower already this morning. And I'll add to that some of the things that I and, probably James will speak to is that so much of our challenge and our opportunity in the next couple of decades will answer the question of whether we stay one. So just to set a bit of context, and I think as some of you might know, Ontario's electricity chain, it has a few key links in it. James's company and a few others like it, the generators, they make all the electricity in Ontario. And then companies like Hydro One, the transmitter, they build the big towers, they build the big wires to get it to communities around Ontario. And then companies like mine, the local distributors, we step down that voltage and we deliver it to the doorstep to power our homes, businesses, hospitals, schools, and so on. And, for those companies who are, rate regulated, such as monopoly distribution companies like Alexicon, we've got the OEB, the Ontario Energy Board. They oversee our prices. They set our equity return ceiling at about 8 to 9%. And then they oversee other aspects of our operation. And then us distributors, what we're really set up as is we're set up as for-profit corporations under law, but we're also regulated monopolies, and for the most part, we're owned by municipalities. So we exist in this really interesting hybrid space of sorts. And as I'm sure you know, and as Greg mentioned, the energy sector, it's undergoing this tremendous challenge and opportunity of growth. Ontario's electricity appetite is rapidly growing. We're looking at a doubling of demand in electricity in the province over the next 25 years. And for a few local utilities like mine that serve rapidly growing communities, most of that demand is going to materialize in the next decade or so. It took us about a century to build the grid that we've got, and now we essentially have to rebuild that grid again over, in a quarter of the time, and for some of us even less. So for us, it really requires this all-hands-on-deck approach: human capital, financial capital, supply chain, social license, regulatory approvals. And we can't falter. We sell an inherently dangerous product. We need to supply nearly perfect power to our customers, especially for our friends in industrial manufacturing and our medical fields. And look, this is why I love the energy sector. I'm a sucker for puzzles. And the challenge that I have, and many other distribution CEOs will have, is we have this tremendous growth potential, but we have to figure out how to unlock it. Companies like mine that have recently doubled our grid investment programs, we're about to do it again in the next few years, and then keep on going after that. And that puzzle of scaling up cost effectively, safely, and doing it smart, that's really what we're wrestling to the ground right now. And so Alexicon and companies like it, we already partner with folks like Steve's company, Aecon, today. While we have internal skilled trades, we also work with our contractor community to get the work done. That's either through time and materials agreements, or increasingly through kind of design build unit price agreements. So how we expand those partnerships is really a question of how we evolve models like P3s to fit in this kind of unique conditions of these highly regulated distribution businesses. And for us, traditional P3s, they kind of work like off-balance sheet financing, but that doesn't really quite fit our needs. Because we get access to cheap debt ourselves, and ultimately anything that's off-balance sheet, it almost invariably comes right back on for accounting and credit rating purposes. And then on the equity side, some municipal shareholders, such as Alexicons, they've taken this leadership role of investing equity in, but distribution companies all across the province are going to need lots more to renew those end-of-life assets, as well as build to serve that increasing demand. So, this is, of course, something that Minister Lecce just announced yesterday, that the province is really looking into removing some of those barriers to investment, which, of course, only adds to the opportunity here. So I think that's really where the creative innovations come in. How do you in this room partner with us to double the size of Ontario's local electricity grid over the next decade or two, while also ensuring that we continue to meet that bar of delivering that value for money and affordability to our ratepayers?
Okay, that's a great start, and we're going to touch on some of the ways that we think we can do that as the panel progresses. James, Bruce is structured differently than Alexicon in that it's already owned by the private sector, but the assets and the land at Bruce is publicly owned. And you've got offtake agreements with the public sector. So you're already enjoying some of the characteristics of what forms a true PPP. Can you speak to the success of the model at Bruce and your thoughts of the ability to replicate or the application of that model throughout Canada in the energy space, nuclear or otherwise?
Yeah, a great question. So, I'm completely aligned with you. I think the model that we have at Bruce Power has served the Bruce site well, the community that we operate in, our investors, but I also think it served Ontario and Canada well. And in a true sense, it's a public-private partnership, right? You want that dynamic of, let me call it public control of an asset. So we have a controlled contract with the IESO. We have a lease with Ontario Power Generation in the province that runs to 2064 and beyond. So with that, there's a sense of public control and a public level of accountability, and I don't think we should underestimate the importance of that. But then we also have that private drive for innovation and that risk transfer. But what I would say, and I think we have a very unique model at Bruce, but if I could just go to some of the previous comments, I agree with what Amanda said, but I think when it comes to, I think we can look at public-private partnerships in two contexts. I think there's the context of let me call it the operational component of the asset. I think where we need to have a harder look is at the project delivery model. At Bruce, they kind of get mashed together. In a lot of the contracts we're talking about, they're not necessarily the same. And I think we need to recognize that the way we've done construction, and nuclear's been hugely successful at on time, on budget, safety with quality. But what we need to do the next 20 years, what we've done the last 20 years is not going to get us to where we need to get to. And at Bruce Power, we really kind of simplify this down to what makes a project successful. Safety, quality, schedule, and cost, in that order. If you follow things in that order, you get the cost at the end. But I also think that we need to recognize, I think the previous speaker from IO, I think she just nailed it, is we have to find a way to reduce the cost of projects. And people say, James, what contractual model do you like? Do you like fixed price or time and materials? And Aecon knows this. I hate them both, but I don't know what's better. Because with a fixed price contract, I look at it and say, that's the lowest price I'm going to pay a vendor. And with a time and materials, well, what's the motivation to manage cost? And we try to work together as partners to find what is the right balance of that. But, you know, for me, and we've got 3,000 people at Bruce A today doing construction work. So I'll just give you an example of where the area of innovation that I think we are lacking in Canada broadly. We talk about AI and 3D models, and all of that is great. But I will tell you, the difference between success today at Bruce A and not success in our construction project comes down to people who have rolled up their sleeves before the work has started and planned and prepared it, that get into the details, and the workers that are in the field executing the work. And sometimes I say we're trying to be too Harvard smart and not enough farmer smart. And what we can't let, I mean, we have a culture in Canada, we have it in a lot of our organizations, this is an opinion, not on Bruce Power's behalf, but speaking for James. We sometimes in Canada think the process is the product. So if we set up these fancy models and processes, we think it's going to get us a better result. When actually, the process isn't the product. It's, did you have good preparation? Were you in the details with people that actually knew the work? And were people set up to do that work every single day? I can tell you, most of the delays we've had on our refurbishment project, they are all preventable. They're not safety issues. We'll never compromise safety. We'll never compromise quality. They're issues that can be found in planning and prep. And we need to find a way to get into that roll up our sleeves mentality, because if we just build process and risk and contingency and risk and contingency, we're not going to be able to, whatever the model is, there's not enough money to chase the number of projects.
Yeah.
So my message is farmer smart, not Harvard smart. Now, our chief legal counsel at Bruce Power, he has a Harvard degree, so I have to be very careful when I say that. So I bought him a shirt that said Harvard smart and farmer smart. So I'm not, if anybody's from Harvard, I'm not offending you. But we have to get back to that back to the basics. That's what we've lost over the last 20, 30 years.
Well, and I think Angela spoke to that.
She did.
In terms of the change being that collaboration is now the word before, during, and after.
Totally.
But that requires an attitudinal change by all the participants in the industry. Steve, maybe I'll just jump to you quickly as the private sector person on the podium. It'd be great to get your thoughts on what Amanda and James just spoke to, and also maybe specifically to the intellectual capital and the core competencies in the PPP industry that you believe can be applied and have been applied in the energy space to date.
Sure, and good morning, everybody. Obviously, Amanda and James are very important clients of Aecon, so I agree 100% with everything they said, but in particular, one word resonates with me that Amanda mentioned about barriers, because it came up in the Premier's speech and it came up in what Angela was speaking about, and that is breaking down barriers so that we can be innovative and help, and we're ready to help solve your problems. Amanda, there are barriers to be able to do that. You mentioned a couple of them, but we're ready. And James mentioned back to basics. P3 model And this is really a question about its DNA. And when you look at it and look at its elements and see how they can be transferred from one sector to another, it's about the DNA of P3s. P3 model is not an end in itself. It's not sacred to us as a model. It is the core elements of the P3 and the core skills and competencies of the people that have joined this industry that are critical to us and critical to being able to advance national projects of national interest across all industries. The ability to navigate complexity, complex structuring of transactions, to understand and invest private capital, the emotional intelligence, let's just say, involved in establishing multi-partner relationships between private and public sector, which is not so easy, and between private sector and other private sector partners. So these are sort of elements of the DNA of the people and the P3 industry itself, which I think are readily transferable to other sectors of industry. And of course, we're talking here about energy, and that is the next big thing. And I think the people in the P3 industry are ready and willing and able to pivot over there to help get this done. One of the important sort of areas in common is revenue. We've all been dying in the P3 industry for revenue deals. A lot of what will bring innovation to the table, Amanda mentioned equity stepping up to solve problems, will happen when there's a revenue deal on the table. Energy is revenue, and I think that is going to be really exciting if we can move over to that area.
That's great. I'm glad you touched on that, because that was a question I was going to ask from the prior session. So, Aaron, CIB's role. So CIB has a unique perspective on this topic because, frankly, you've been a participant in this industry for quite some time. It would be great to get your general thoughts on the topic and what's been discussed, and then maybe we can dig into one of the specific things that you folks are doing over there.
Sure. Thanks, Greg, and nice to be here. I'm one of those Infrastructure Ontario alumni that Lisa and Angela. I have an anniversary as well, by the way. I think I finished my term as CEO 5 years ago this week, and watching Angela, you just have to think to yourself, wow, they really traded up, didn't they? It's like when you meet your ex and they're dating someone handsomer and richer and younger, and you think, wow, they're doing well. So I feel that way. But I think my time at IO and now at the CIB gives me a good perspective. The CIB, of course, we're not a project deliverer. We don't run procurements. We're a financer of projects. And so we have quite a different vantage point. And the way we look at projects, first of all, the idea of the CIB is to try and get more infrastructure built in the country faster. And to do that, you got to figure out, well, why is less getting built slower? Like, what is the problem? There are many regulatory approvals processes. How do you create a buy-in? How do we get the cost of things down? Because we can only build more if we can afford it. But the role the CIB can play, we think, is by taking putting a tranche of money into these projects that is taking either above market risk at below market returns, some combination of that. We can stretch public dollars further and crowd in private money. As Steve said, to do that, it has to start from projects that have some kind of revenue to them, which is why we have naturally gravitated to the energy and specifically the electricity space. And it really has helped me rethink what we mean when we say P3s. Once upon a time when I was at IO on this stage, James stood at the podium and talked about Bruce Power being the largest P3 in Canada. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, kind of, but that's not my kind of P3. I got hospitals and maybe a courthouse. It was a pretty narrow box. And I think what all of us in industry, James was ahead of his time maybe, what all of us in industry I think have evolved to is we've got to really go back to the first principles of what a public-private partnership is. It's not a contract form. It's not one kind of document. It's a much bigger concept. And when you apply that concept to projects that have real sources of revenue, an ability to pay for themselves, but also real risk, I think there's a unique opportunity for us to to get the best of public and private in the way James and Amanda have been talking about. And the CIB tries to just be like the grease to that happening. What we've seen why it has worked so well, I think, in the clean power space, so generation, transmission, storage, why it has worked so well is because I think it has most of the, why we've had so much success, there's a lot of the resident ingredients to a really good collaborative approach. There are super capable operators, 2 of them on this stage, but many of them across this country. And wind developers and battery projects we'll talk about. There's a really capable, so that's someone you want to partner with, step 1. Step 2, there are really clear public policy goals. Deliver electrons to people in affordable ways, because energy is a big part of most people's budgets, so getting that as cost effectively as possible matters. Having it reliably matters, and having it in a way that allows business to grow and as a source of economic competitiveness for the country matters. So you've got great, capable private sector, you've got really clear public policy goals, and in the middle you've got folks like us who can help facilitate those partnerships. And I say there's a whole ecosystem of people like the ISO would be another example of that, who play a really critical role, I think, in trying to make that happen. So all I'm trying to say is I think this sector is incredibly well set up for public-private partnerships. We're seeing a ton of them. We can talk about some on the stage, but I think we're right at the beginning of what is a really sharp rise, given the magnitude of the challenge that Amanda laid out for us at the start of this.
Yeah. Speaking of grease in the wheel, do you want to touch maybe on the unique loan strategy that CIB's developed to support calls for power in a number of Canadian provinces, BC, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and then maybe elaborate on some of the strategy advances that each of these provincial energy infrastructures have done, along with how you've collaborated with some of the Indigenous partners as well?
For
some
sure.
of the specifics that you've done.
For sure. So I'll give you some numbers as context. The CIB has just over made 100 or so investments, 110, I think, as of today. More than 25 of those, so more than a quarter of them are in the clean power space. More than, of our $18 billion committed, more than 5 of it is in clean power. So however you slice it, this is a major part of our portfolio. And that doesn't count, Greg, most of the things you just talked about, because what we've realized over time, the way to do this at scale, the calls for power that Greg's mentioning in British Columbia and Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick so far, and conversations in other provinces and territories as well, what we've done is created a standardized product that when a province or territory is going out to do a call for wind power or storage, there can be a standard offering from the CIB that does 2 things. It allows the project to remain cost competitive. If you can bring down the PPA by a couple bucks, we should be able to get more renewables built faster at the same impact to ratepayers. So step 1, we try and keep them affordable, but step 2, we provide a product where any Indigenous partners can be equity owners in those projects, get a loan from the CIB, they can use that money to make their equity investment, they can start getting dividends from the project right away and pay back their loan to us over time. And what that, I think, has allowed those jurisdictions to do is be much more ambitious. Now, to be clear, wind projects, solar projects in this country, they happened before us. They could happen without us. Not as many as fast could happen because we'd hit a barrier of affordability for ratepayers and because we'd have a social acceptability challenge in building many of these linear infrastructure projects absent meaningful economic participation for Indigenous parties. So what we've done, this offer that we've developed, it allows those procurements to happen, all bidders to take advantage of the same terms. We end up then signing borrowing agreements with each of the winners of the procurement. So it ends up for us, 7 different loans or however many there were. But the idea is it allows authorities to, because as Amanda said, the electricity sector talks all the time, we got to build as much as we built in the last 100 years and and I think people almost gloss over, like that's real. We need to build what it took us since before World War I to do, and we got to do it now while we're all spring chickens or whatever it was that Lisa said. So that's what the CIB is doing. And as I said, the scale of what we're seeing across the country, Greg, in the generation space, but also on some of the interprovincial and interterritorial transmission projects and storage, it's incredible.
Yeah, and I think this is a particular space, speaking to your Indigenous loan programs, where Indigenous partnership is going to be critical, given where a lot of these assets are located and where we need to build. So I'm super excited to see how that program goes. Let's turn to nuclear. There was an announcement, which you probably all saw, the US government made yesterday, that they're going to invest $80 billion in nuclear reactors in pretty short order. So this is the first of the asset classes that we'll talk specifically about. But nuclear is seen as a space in which Canada, both of which companies, by the way, that was announced, Cameco and Brookfield, are Canadian companies, but we won't get too much into that in terms of disclosure to the current administration. But Canada has a real opportunity to lead, as we did with CANDU, and the SMR project at Darlington, which was announced as one of the nation-building projects from the Prime Minister, is the first SMR project outside of China. And I believe it's really being watched internationally around the globe, because the goal of SMRs is to be able to get them to every country in the world, not just the rich countries, so that all parties and all people can access this technology. And this is a technology that we see more private sector parties talk more and more about as an ability to drive their power demands for data centers and other high-intensity uses. So we have 3 people on the stage who are invested in the nuclear business, and can you speak to each of you, and happy to go in whichever order you wish, about the potential of the nuclear space in Canada and the merits of continuing to push hard in this space, and some of the core competencies of PPPs that have helped drive this development and will continue to drive this development in the energy space. Maybe, Steve, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, our company is heavily invested now in the nuclear sector. It's not my group, but it's impossible to miss it. We're obviously involved in many, if not all, of the initiatives that are happening in Canada, and looking at some of the opportunities outside of Canada as well. It's become exciting again, nuclear. We've had a renaissance, really. This is the word that has been described. And I think it is going to be very transformative even for our company. How has P3 or P3 sort of elements of it helped? Obviously, you are a P3, and so that is sort of the poster child for it. But underneath it, as I was speaking about early on, the P3 is about the DNA of P3, and I think one of the ways in which this nuclear renaissance will get done is through collaborative models of delivery, to make sure that we are able to get these built successfully and to get the costs down. Because as you say, Greg, the idea is to be able to commoditize the SMR and then eventually to democratize it. So I'm hoping that sort of the elements of P3 around collaboration and innovation and striving to get to the best model. Something that we talk about a lot in P3s is perfecting the model, but it's going to be, the model under which these SMRs are delivered in particular, that is going to ensure that they can eventually be commoditized and democratized. So that's my...
For sure. James, yeah. I know you're not SMRs at your facility, but...
Yeah, no, I agree with the commentary. I mean, I think there's 2 things I would say. Firstly, I just want to take a bit of a detour, if that's okay, because Aaron mentioned he's been at the CIB for the last 5 years. Hard to believe, but I think we should give Aaron. Aaron has driven the CIB to massive new heights and a large number of projects over the last 5 years. A lot of people were critical of the CIB in its early days, and Aaron has really driven it. So I just want to recognize Aaron. There's a round of applause for that.
I'm still not Angela, but thank you.
Yeah, that's. But it is true. I mean, the CIB has gone from 0 to 60 and 0 to 100, and however you want to define it, in 5 years is pretty amazing. Sorry, back to your question on nuclear. So the perspective I would offer is that I think sometimes, and this goes back to my previous comment about developing innovative models, and the biggest issue in any power generation space, but nuclear and hydro in particular, because they are long long projects to establish the revenue that will come for those projects. Is I think what we need to do is look at how do we combine the existing generating fleet with the expansion of the fleet. And let me just give you an example. So if you take the Bruce Power site today, we have 8 reactors. We have 6 of them that are, well, 1 on outage, but 6 of them that are operating and 2 of them that are under refurb. So how does that business model work? Well, we sell our power to the ISO. We generate the cash from those 6 units that goes into the 2 refurbs. And then when those 2 refurbs come back, we go down on 2 more refurbs. So the cash constantly cycles through. Arguably, potentially one of the constructs here is when all of those 8 units are operating, now they're generating cash that go into the new build. And so you're recycling that cash. And I think sometimes when, I think it's easier if you have a wind farm or a gas plant that has a shorter construction time frame, because you can put capital out for 1, 2, or 3 years while that is under construction. With hydro and nuclear, it's so long term. So I think the way we need to rethink this is, how do you bring private investment into existing generating assets, right? And then how do you combine those existing generating assets with new nuclear? Or, for example, with new hydro potentially. Because you have a fundamental cash generating component to that. And so, I'm not going to get as kind of focused on technology, but I think that has to be the model. We have to think about how we're generating cash throughout, but it also puts accountability on the private sector to deliver on the generation as well. The final thing I'll say, I agree with you, there's a renaissance in nuclear. I'm not surprised. I mean, I always used to say that we were asked to pay for the wedding, but weren't invited to the party. Now we're invited to the party, and when you're paying for the wedding and you're the ones delivering the output, you're eventually going to get invited. I think part of the reason why there's a renaissance, and I think why, I don't want to speak for Premier Ford, but why people are prepared to give us a chance on new nuclear is because we've delivered on the refurbs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think as long as we deliver, I think we'll build the confidence. If we don't deliver, I think that confidence will disappear. And so we always have to be cautious of complacency. Just because we have the confidence today doesn't mean we're going to have it tomorrow. Yeah. And I think that credibility is so important.
Yeah. Well, welcome back to the party. We missed you.
Thank you. Although you would have always invited us.
Yes. Aaron, I don't know if you anything further to add to this group?
Just briefly, I mean, the CIB is an investor in the SMR project at Darlington. We were an early investor in the early works phase. And now, if you look at how that project is structured, it is, again, if we broaden our definition, it has the DNA of a P3. What do I mean? So it's got a public utility, of course, OPG. It has private sector, both the contractors who have some form of gain share and pain share, some alignment of incentive mechanisms. Same on the technology providers. So GE Hitachi have the same structure. So there's real skin in the game for the private sector partners. It's got financing not only from us, but from the Building Ontario Fund, the provincial equivalent, and from the CGF, which is part of PSP, so from an institutional investor. And it's going to have Indigenous ownership. That's, I think, by all intents and plans. And so for the CIB getting involved in that project, part of what we were trying to bring is the spirit of the P3. Create innovation, create aligned incentives, create the right framework for a successful project with both public and private sector. And as we look at the potential for nuclear build across this country, SMRs, large-scale nuclear, we really think, again, if we follow the same principles of P3s, that's how we're going to go furthest, fastest, whether that's in Western Canada, where people are looking at SMRs for some mix of electricity production and industrial use, whether that's in the build-out of the next wave of our large-scale reactors across Ontario. I think that we are incorporating the best of P3s. They don't always exactly look in the same contractual form, but they have exactly that spirit, and that's what we're trying to bring as a CIB.
Excellent. I want to move to transmission lines, but before I do that, Amanda, I know that there's specific, you spoke earlier about laying down the gauntlet, so maybe I thought maybe we can dig into that a little bit. I know there's specific capital spends that you're going to do and particular assets that you're going to do. And do you want to maybe talk to this crowd specifically about that and how we may assist in some of those, if we come up with the right model and the right innovation? Maybe you want to talk about your capital program over the next little while.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Absolutely. When I think about the attributes of many of the transactions that we talk about in and outside of energy, I think there's a couple of really interesting compare and contrast for the distribution context. Often for these arrangements, there is a public or a quasi-public entity that does not have the core competency of doing the work that's required. But in distribution, we have that core competency. We know how to build, we know how to operate, we know how to maintain our assets. But what many distributors lack is the capacity to scale up at the pace required. We need partners for that. And we use some of those partners now. Again, my friend Steve at Aecon over here, we do work with our contractor community. So how do we expand that model? And I think the other piece for these kinds of arrangements is there's often a big piece of infrastructure in discussion. In distribution, we got a lot of tiny stuff that kind of goes together. We got poles, we got wires, we got transformers. And I think for us that the types of things in terms of asset classes that would be of interest to rooms like these are larger assets, such as our stations. So, just for a lexicon context, we've got about 20 municipal substations that need upgrading or replacement in the next decade. They're not big. They're each, let's say, $20 million a station, but you stick all of those together and you start to get a large number. And then there's a couple of our big municipal transformer stations, and those are really the step down of the voltage from transmission. A rebuild of that costs 5 to 8 times as much as a municipal substation. So there's probably some space to aggregate within that. And so that strikes me as really the space to start the kind of discussion that we need to have. And I really go back to this piece of how do we add the financial element to some of these design build arrangements that we do on a smaller scale that we have and that we need to kind of create for the future. And again, the attributes that we're dealing with is that, we can access debt really cheaply ourselves. We generally need to access more equity over time. And anything that takes risk off ratepayers and delivers affordability, it's a good thing in our world. So how does that get married up with what our private partners are able to deliver as far as, project financing costs, the own expectations on revenues and return? And I think that's probably the starting point of the ground that we can till together.
Thank you. Specifically vis-a-vis transmission lines, we saw the Premier of BC announce recently some new legislation to speed up construction of a $6 billion transmission line in that province to address some of the things the Premier spoke about in terms of getting access to LNG, mining, and so on, which is exactly the types of things that we need to be doing in this province and other provinces. And so we've seen it, we've seen this type of asset class used and this model being used in Northern Ontario, Alberta, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, sometimes using a bit of a progressive model to kind of get to that development phase to clear regulatory hurdles before you move forward. But this is a place, Aaron, where our Indigenous partners have been particularly important to the procurement, ownership, construction, sometimes operations, and so on. Can you maybe touch a little bit more on some of the projects that you've done in this space, both more generally and maybe a little bit about some of those Indigenous participations that we were speaking a little bit about?
For sure. Why don't the best project to talk about, I think, is there's an that transmission line between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. It's a project that's currently in detailed design, ordering long lead items, getting final approvals. It's quite advanced. And so this is a project that is owned by 3 parties right now, with the potential to add. But the current 3 parties that own it are Nova Scotia Power, which is a shareholder-held utility in Nova Scotia, number 1. Number 2, the CIB, we're equity owners line. And number 3 is the 13 Mi'kmaq communities of Nova Scotia jointly have formed a vehicle to own electricity and energy assets, and they're equity owners in the project, the 3 of us. And I say with room to grow because it's a transmission intertie between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, But in future phases, the line will continue deeper into New Brunswick, and I think that eventually we're going to see similar ownership structure on that side of the border from both the NB Power, the provincial utility, and Indigenous communities within New Brunswick. I think that'll end up being the ownership of the line by the time all phases are done. And again, the idea there is to bring the best of public and private partnership, and Steve said, to create the alignment of incentives, starting from a pot of revenue. This is an asset that creates revenue, and so it's a great way to organize a consortium around, all with aligned incentives, because we all have a stake in making the business work, on the one side, making the line highly reliable and efficient, and therefore revenue generating, and on the other hand, making sure it gets built quickly and on time and on budget. And so we're really excited about that model, and we think it has a lot of potential across the country, again, to create a different way. It's not different, it's really building on something like Wate, as you mentioned, yes. Northern Ontario. It really is taking a lot of the lessons learned from a project like Wate, but thinking about how do we go even further in creating Indigenous ownership opportunities so they are meaningfully at the table right from the start, yes. Which means they have influence on alignment decisions, and they have a seat at the table right from the outset of the project, and a real economic stake, which creates an incredibly different environment for a project to move forward when you've got everyone at the table like that.
And Amanda was speaking to social license in terms of what, our utility, and that's a great example of paying attention to the social license, yeah. with their partnership. Oneida. Oneida is, the Oneida battery project is widely seen as a successful model of the application of the PPP principles in the energy space. Steve, do you want to maybe touch on that in terms of what made it so and what continues to make it such a success, and whether those same principles can be applied across?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Oneida is a great example of how we at Aecon made a pivot into the energy space. I mean, we, from an investment perspective, our construction teams were supporting the feasibility and development of that project, but we got involved in the later stages to help push it through the financing phase. So same team that has been working on P3s of all different kinds in transportation, put to work helping to advance and close that project, and so it's just sort of proof of concept. What was successful, the partnership that was created, CIB, Aaron, were critical in moving first of its kind project, first of its kind not in the world, but in Canada, of course, at that scale, helping us get through some of the important risks that we undertook in doing a project like that for the first time. This was not just a partnership with CIB, but a very broad partnership involving public and private stakeholders and 2 Indigenous partners, Mississaugas of the Credit and Six Nations of the Grand River, with whom we've had a very long-standing, real partnership with at Aecon for a very long time. Multiple public sector entities involved in that project, obviously, the ISO, Hydro One, CIB, and that project, I would say, was able to happen because it was put in a bit of a cocoon, and enabled to develop and without being hindered by, let's just call it the traditional procurement environment. It needed that in order to be successful, in order to work through some very complicated and difficult issues that were inherent in doing a first of its kind project, but also because it was right on the heels of COVID and lithium prices going nuts. So it was well protected and allowed to kind of breathe, and for the partners who came with complementary skills and a really great chemistry to be able to develop a project of that nature. So I sort of attribute both the way the partnership was struck, bringing private capital and typical P3 skills to the table and the chemistry between all the different partners, and of course the support of CIB to help with getting a first of its kind project across the line.
It's interesting. I mean, a lot of the themes that we're continuing to hear in this space is, and the themes that we've heard this morning, collaboration, innovation, and frankly, kind of checking ourselves at the door on this is the right model, this is the only model, this is the way that we have to do this, but rather bringing principles of partnership and sometimes being farmer smart gets things done. I also wanted to note that for folks that may have questions, you can fire them into the app, and we'd be happy. We're going to save some time at the end to the extent that you have any. Major projects. Maybe we can speak a little bit to the elephant in the room, Aaron. We hear a lot of talk about the federal government's projects of national interest. I know there's some announcements coming up in the next couple of weeks. Do you expect some of these to be energy related in addition to what may have already been announced? And if so, how do you see the interaction between the major project office that's been recently set up and the CIB?
It's been the best.
That you can talk about.
Sure. It's been the best marketing for the Grey Cup, hasn't it? We all know that date now pegged in our head because they've
Yes.
said the next wave of announcements will be by Grey Cup. And
Yes.
Look, what I would say is this. Firstly, if you look at the criteria that the major projects office is using to screen projects, it's projects that add meaningfully to sovereignty, security, and resilience of our country, that add significantly to the economic productivity of the country, that meet our energy transition goals. I don't know, that sounds a lot like the kind of projects we're talking about.
Yes.
So I'm not, I can't answer specific questions about what will or won't be on the list, but that's not my department. But what I can say is it would certainly seem when you go through what it is we're trying to do, move projects forward, move all projects forward in this country faster than we have. It's not about what's on the list, and I think and you've heard it already this morning, the Premier was talking about it, I think it's all of us in this room know that this isn't about a list of 5 or 10 or 20 projects, it's about how do we unstick. Because some of Amanda's projects will not be on the list of projects of national significance. That doesn't mean they can take as long as they've taken. Like that, the imperative is true for all. But what I will say is for the projects that are, I think, designated and the sort of the fast track that entails, if you think about the criteria, it would be really surprising. To me, as an observer, is not an official, it would be really surprising if you don't see more energy projects of all kinds on that list, because they check all of the boxes I just described. Now, to your second question, what I think we're all in this room aware of is that beyond the headline challenges of approvals and permitting and whatever, there is a different challenge, which is just coordination within government. And sometimes it can feel like, if you're a project developer, I think of the Oneida folks who we know well, if you're the developer on that project, how many different doors you got to knock on, and you got to talk to the regulator, and you got to talk to the province and the CIB, and you're a project developer, you're just scrounging for capital where you can find it and solutions to problems. So making that process easier is also part of the MPO's mandate. That's why you see it talking about being I can't remember the exact wording, but the clearinghouse, the screening for financing tools that are available, because there are a number. From grants and sort of traditional, but more importantly, I would say some of the tools like the CIB or the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program that the federal government has stood up. So I think what the major project office is trying to do is coordinate those tools to make it easier for a project that's on that list. And what we're seeing already on the first 5 that were named is exactly that. It's just a higher level of coordination amongst us. What do each of us bring to that party? What can the CIB do? What can other adjacent tools do? Who at the provincial level, like Ontario has a really well-functioning Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program that's existed for a long time. How do we take advantage of that? So I think the MPO is just the Major Projects Office, trying to get all of those in one room and at one table to figure out how best to support the projects that are identified as of national significance. So early days for sure, but on the first 5 projects that were named a month ago, that's exactly what's happening. And so our team is working with the Major Projects Office and other public sector sources of financing to figure out how best to move those projects forward as fast as possible.
Great. I don't know, I think you were going to put the questions up on the screen. I don't know if there's any in there for this group before we move on to the next topic, but it doesn't appear to be. So one thing that I think that has been set on this platform is that we have the fundamentals are there in this space in terms of I'll use your words, Aaron, super capable operators, clear policy, public policy goals, revenue generation, Steve, which is what you were talking about earlier. So we have what is really, and you alluded to in terms of what the MPO is being set up to do, we have the fundamentals in these asset classes of energy that should be able to unlock the power of the principles of a PPP. Maybe just as, if I can just go around for some, a minute or so from each person of just some final thoughts to this group of unlocking that potential and how we can do that in this space. Amanda? Sorry to start with you.
Oh, that's great. I'm thinking about what I can say that I haven't said, because I think my message here is fairly simple in terms of where the challenges and where the opportunities are. And I think maybe just sort of picking up on the last conversation about projects of national significance. When we talk about energy, we often talk generation, transmission, distribution, and for good reasons, because we go from the billions to the millions. But one thing that I think I would leave everybody with, and an important piece as we're thinking about the infrastructure build out and the magnitude of this task, is that distribution is the last mile connection for customers. It's also the first call they make. So for the 16 million people that are across Ontario who all use electricity, distribution is that piece that needs to get all those electrons to those homes, businesses, schools, hospitals. And so from that perspective, that's the piece that I would leave in terms of significance and the creativity and the innovation and the risk sharing, and to pick up on all of these concepts and the bringing together of really practical, farmer smart approaches to this, is how do we crack that nut? How do we think about aggregation of some of it so that it's at a scope and scale that makes sense from a private sector perspective? How do we think about risk sharing? How do we bring all those pieces together?
James, I may turn to you next, and just as a plug for your t-shirt supplier, I think what I'm going to do as a deal toy for the next couple of deals that we close is that exact t-shirt that you suggested, but maybe if you can add a few of your own thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first thing, if I take a step back, because we're all in a long game here.
Yeah.
So I think what's really important is that as we expedite, which I'll come back to in a second, the two principles we're not going to compromise on is we recognize the importance of consulting, engaging, and offering economic participation opportunities to First Nations and Indigenous communities. And we're not going to compromise environmental protection. And I think we need to keep hammering that, because we're in a cycle right now where everybody's build. But those items are pretty fundamental values for us. So to answer your question specifically, the word I would use is alignment. And that is back to my sort of view that we always think process is the product in Canada. If I think about when was the last time that, I'll tell you, I thought government and the private sector moved at record speed, was during COVID. Like, it was amazing what we did as a country during COVID. It's amazing what the private sector did. It's amazing what the public sector did. We kind of forget about that. When COVID hit, we didn't go and decide to change a bunch of processes and set up a new office. What did we have? We had alignment. right? And all of us in our organizations, you know, sometimes when something's kind of floated around for a long time and the boss comes in and says, hey, this needs to get going, what do? We all get in a room and we figure it out. And I know that sounds very kind of basic, but I think what we have to tackle is a cultural bias towards somebody wants to hand the baton off versus we hit the finish line. And I think that, I'll just be honest with you, what I see, we're federally regulated. Bruce Power's process hasn't changed. I don't see Bruce Power's process changing dramatically as a result of anything with C5. But I can tell you the focus on alignment at the federal level, just the narrative and the direction set by the Prime Minister and the premiers, it's causing everybody to think of their jobs differently. And so that's what I would leave you with. The word is alignment. And let's not all get caught up on processes. Yeah. You know, because during COVID, we did amazing things as a country. And we did it within our regulatory environment and the processes we had. We just had alignment and speed, and we found a way to meet those requirements. So again, I'm not negative on C5 or the major projects. I think they're great, but they will not be successful unless there's a cultural change on how we tackle those things. They won't. You know, it relies on those civil servants, very dedicated people, by the way, in our regulatory agencies, have the ability to drive that alignment and issues to conclusion quickly.
Yeah, very good. Aaron?
Well, I guess I would just add, if I think about the room we're in, and I said this earlier, but the definition of what is infrastructure is constantly evolving. And the definition of what a P3 is also constantly evolving. And so my real encouragement is to think a bit more broadly about both of those two things. Like, I don't know, data, this panel's about energy, but you know, what is data, what is AI compute? It's a whole whack of energy, a building with some certain chips in them and some cables. Yeah. My point being, we need to keep being more nimble as an industry and as a group of actors to be thinking about where the opportunities are. And like, I love the IO pipeline. I was the proud publisher. I sat on this stage and gave them out. It is a very important tool. It is also like this much of a slice of the overall infrastructure activity that's happening in this country. And not only that, of the collaborative models that are happening around this country. And I think if you're to stay too narrow and too in your box, and I'm talking about whether you're a developer or a contractor or an investor, advisor, if you are stay in your lane, you're gonna miss what's happening. And I think you're gonna suffer for that, and so is the country, because we're not bringing the full skills, capabilities, and experience base that we have to bear. I joked earlier, but honestly, like, there are so many lessons learned from the Bruce history, and how that asset came to be in private hands and how it's grown since and how they've been able to invest. Like, there are real lessons for us. And if you're so narrow in your, like, well, I do hospitals or something, like, you're gonna miss the boat. And I think the biggest point of this panel for me is if we have to start pulling in or merging between different asset classes, and whether that's the electricity sector, other transition fuels, you know, I think of hydrogen, I think of digital infrastructure. If we don't start, A, bringing the best of what we've learned as an industry over the last couple of decades, but B, also recognizing that what we've learned was useful, like, there's analogy, they rhyme, but they don't sound the same, if you know what I mean. Like, we've got to take those lessons, but also realize the fundamental differences. Like, not to digress, when we did Oneida, the biggest problem, as Steve said, was lithium prices were all over the place. Well, we invested in P3 hospitals. I didn't worry about that. I had to figure out, how do you take the best of what you knew but apply it to a different set of problems? And it's a huge opportunity for all of us who've been in this space for a while to either do or don't do. And I think we're all way better off for it if we lean into it.
Agreed. Steve, last word to you.
I like the word alignment that James mentioned. Of course, Aaron is alluding to being nimble and agile, and that's always been characteristic of who we are here. Amanda threw down the gauntlet. Normally we run through those with our hair on fire. But we've learned a lot about risk also through the P3 process and the projects. They've overwhelmingly been successful. The ones that have been the most successful are the ones where we've taken a reasonable and rational and common sense approach to risk. But really, the people that make up this conference, council, and the Canadian infrastructure industry are really a national treasure in a way. And the brain trust that has come together to help move projects forward is, up till now, are the people who will take us through the next stage of our evolution here to deliver the most important projects for Canada and around the world. So that's how I would conclude.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, everybody. Innovation, collaboration, alignment, the 3 words for this panel. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.